What is going on, guys? I hope you enjoyed that guitar intro. We are moving towards another episode of Metal History today. Today we will be talking about Death. Formed in 1984 by the legendary Chuck Schuldiner, this is one of my favorite bands of all time, and I'm really excited to be making this video on them. And of course, Death is widely considered to be one of the most influential bands ever, and really the beginning of death metal. So let's move through their history and talk about what happened to this incredible band. So first we had the beginning with Scream Bloody Gore in 1987. After a lot of various demo tapes with various musicians, Chuck Schuldiner finally released this album to us all after actually being recorded twice in 1987. It was a brutal start for the band. A very rough album with themes of killing, blood, and horror themes. Even the album art looks like something you see out of a 80s horror slasher flick. It was shocking to many listeners and very revolutionary for the time. There really was nothing out there like this. And it is widely considered to be the first death metal album. And I just think it's so awesome that a band called Death started death metal. I mean, it doesn't get more metal than that, does it? But moving on, we arrive at Leprosy. In 1988, shortly after the original, this album set a far different tone, with longer tracks, entirely new lineup, which will be a theme for the band Death, as Chuck was really the only member who stayed throughout this band history. They went through a million different artists throughout the career. It's just insane. But this album was a big improvement in terms of production, with heavy emphasis on bass guitar, but a similar lyrical style focused on death, disease, dying, violence. But it did set the tone sort of for future albums and pushing to a slightly more progressive and thought-provoking direction. We then arrived 2 years later in 1990 at Spiritual Healing. This was the first album to really shift the lyrical content away from the gore and the death topics and towards abortion, society, genetics, and other complicated themes that Chuck really believed in. It once again improved production quality greatly and moved the band even further away from the original themes and towards a more progressive and technical sound. It was an incredible album, and one that for me really solidifies Death as an amazing band in terms of instrumentation and vocals. 1 year later, we had the release of Human. This album continued Death's trends away from the original couple albums and towards a more complicated, progressive music with a far greater emphasis on technicality. This album even featured Paul Masvidal, Sean Reinhart, and Steve DiGiorgio on bass, which was just a stacked lineup. I mean, this album has just bonkers levels of musicianship here. It was undoubtedly an amazing album in terms of musicianship and lyrics too. I mean, this is still Death's best-selling album to this day. And you could argue it was their most impactful lineup, just with so many amazing musicians on one album. It's hard to listen to the best parts because there's so many good parts, This album really, really set the bar high. And for many is considered the Death album that really inspired so many musicians. We then moved to Individual Thought Patterns. This album really continued their dominance in the death metal genre and featured Gene Hoglan, who is just an incredible drummer who has, been in so many different amazing projects. And continued the lyrical themes, too, of critiques on society, and showed Chuck's anger towards the kind of constructs and societal norms that we all have to face day to day. It's one that really holds up, too, in today's, geopolitical climate. And, was just another step forward for this band. We then arrived in 1995 at Symbolic. This was their 6th album and was their biggest move away yet from the traditional works, featuring a huge emphasis on melodic solos and technical lyrics and technical guitar playing too. It was an amazing work yet again. This band just continues to get better with time, which is something really few bands do, in my opinion. And it has some of their most memorable songs, such as Crystal Mountain, Misanthrope, and Zero Tolerance. This, for me, was Death's most important album. It really kind of brought them into that public eye. At this point, they were touring constantly, just hundreds of shows. This was a big release for them, and it showed just how incredible Chuck is. He, being the front member of this band, really just took control of every part of this band, and you can really see his journey throughout the works in terms of musicianship. However, it would take 3 years to end at the last album, The Sound of Perseverance. This was a combination of everything that Chuck has been working towards, and was by far, in my opinion, the most brutal and raw album. It stands alone for me as just one of the best albums ever in the death metal genre. Every song here has a purpose, with so many memorable moments, melodies, and more. It's a monster of an album, and one that truly is so creative, so unique and ambitious that I couldn't think of a better final album for this band. And that brings us to the end of Death and the passing of Chuck Schuldiner, who died from brain cancer and was diagnosed on his 32nd birthday in May 1999. He was originally unable to afford his surgeries due to lack of healthcare insurance, who said they wouldn't cover the surgeries because his cancer predated his new health insurance policy. So he had to raise money through fundraisers, and thankfully, dozens of big metal bands all came together to support him. It's really an incredible thing. But cancer eventually won the battle 2 years later, and he died in 2001 at the age of 34. It's just an incredibly sad story, and another tale of a musician who died just far, far too young in their lives. Chuck inspired so many different people, myself included, and what was so surprising to me is that he was not a brutal, evil man in real life. He was a lover of friendship, animals, and happiness. Even though his lyrics were so brutal and evil, he was an amazing person. And, one of the saddest quotes I heard in an interview from him is that he said that he would wish to live forever if he could, but sadly, that was not the case for him. While his music will live on forever, Chuck won't, and I and many others will miss him every day. So, rest in peace to Chuck Schuldiner, and rest in peace to Death, one of the most amazing bands to ever exist. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this kind of walkthrough of their history. This is such an important band to me and so many others, and if you haven't heard them, go give them a listen. And if you have given them a listen, tell me what you think in the comments. Let's have a good discussion down below. Thank you for watching once again, guys. Like and subscribe. Catch you in the next one.